They said the river of Ntambe only returned the dead. But one morning it gave something back. A man half alive wearing a ring no commoner should own. The one who found him wasn't a queen, not even a healer, just a maid named Sia, whose kindness would rewrite the fate of kingdoms. She didn't know that the man she dragged from the water had once sat on a golden throne, or that by saving him, she had declared war on the crown itself, because sometimes the smallest hands hide the greatest power, and what Sia did next would shock the entire land. Sia was a young maid who lived alone at the edge of the village. She had no family, only a small hut and a few clay pots she used to fetch water. That morning, she walked to the river with her pot like she did every day. The mist was thick and the air was cold. As she knelt to fill the pot, something touched her foot. She looked down and saw a hand, pale, weak, and still. She stepped back in shock. A man's body floated near the reeds, half underwater. His clothes were torn and dirty, but she could tell he was not an ordinary man. A gold ring was on his finger, and his skin looked soft, like someone who had never worked in the fields. Sia looked around. No one was near. She could walk away and no one would know. But the man's chest moved slightly. He was alive. Without thinking, Sia ran to him, grabbed his arms, and pulled him from the river. The body was heavy, but she didn't stop. She dragged him up the hill to her hut. Inside, she laid him on her mat. His face was cold. His chest was bleeding. She covered him with a blanket and lit a small fire. The man didn't wake, but his breathing slowly grew stronger. By midday, the village was loud with drums. The chief was speaking in the market square. He said there had been war in the capital. The king of Aduna had been killed. His own brother had taken the throne, and one man, a traitor, had escaped the palace. The chief said there was a reward for anyone who found him. Sia listened quietly among the crowd. She didn't know what to think. The man in her hut wore a gold ring, the kind only royal men owned. Her hands trembled. She walked home slowly, afraid of what she had done. That night she heard him breathe heavily. His wounds needed cleaning. She tore one of her cloths and washed the blood away. His body shook, but he lived. For 3 days the man didn't speak. He woke only to eat the little soup Sia made. His eyes followed her when she moved, like he was trying to remember something. Sia didn't ask who he was. She didn't want to know. In Ntambe, strangers meant trouble. But she couldn't turn him out. The neighbors started to notice she didn't come out much. Some women whispered that she was hiding a man. Others said she had lost her mind. Sia ignored them. She went out at night to get food, stayed home during the day, and prayed no one would knock on her door. But trouble came. Soldiers began searching every hut in the nearby villages. They were looking for the traitor who escaped the palace. One afternoon they came to Ntambe. Sia heard them before they reached her home. Boots on the dirt road, horses snorting, voices shouting. She stood in front of her hut, her hands tight around her dress. Inside, the man hid under the floor. Sia had built that space long ago to store grain, but now it kept him alive. The soldiers pushed open her door. They looked through her things, lifted her mat, and opened her jars. They found nothing. One of the men noticed a wooden cup with a faded mark. He stared at it, touched the carved symbol, then looked at Sia, but he said nothing. He dropped the cup and left. Sia stayed still until their voices faded. Then she lifted the floorboard and helped the man out. He looked weak and pale, but his eyes were awake. That night it rained. The man finally spoke. He told her that he had once lived in the royal palace. He said the new king was his brother, the same man who tried to kill him. He had escaped through the river when his guards were slain. He thought he would die there. Sia sat quietly. She didn't understand why a prince would be hunted by his own blood, but she didn't ask. She only knew that soldiers would soon return. The next morning, her friend Binta came to visit. Binta had always been kind to Sia, but she noticed Sia was nervous. When she left, she looked back and saw a shadow move behind Sia's curtain. That night, she told the chief. The chief gave her silver coins and promised to protect her if she told no one. Before sunrise, soldiers returned. Their torches lit up the rain. They kicked Sia's door open and shouted her name. She stood in front of them, calm but shaking inside. The man was under the floor again. The soldiers searched everything, even the roof, but still found nothing. The same soldier who had seen the wooden cup before spoke quietly. He told his men that no traitor could hide in such a poor hut. He said the king was dead and that ghosts should be left alone. The others laughed and left with him. When they were gone, Sia and the man escaped through a hole in the back wall and ran into the forest. The ground was wet, the trees dark, and their clothes soaked through, but they kept walking. They found a small empty hut deep in the woods. The roof leaked, but it was enough to keep them dry. Sia built a small fire and cooked roots she found nearby. The man lay down, coughing. She covered him with her shawl and sat by the door watching the rain. Back in Ntambe, Binta's life turned bad. The chief told the soldiers she had lied, and they burned her hut. She ran into the hills, crying and afraid. In the capital, the new king heard that his brother might still be alive. He didn't shout or get angry. He only smiled. Then he called for his best hunter and gave him one order: "Bring me my brother's head." Days turned into weeks inside the forest. The air was cool and the sound of birds filled the mornings. Sia and the man, who still had not told her his name, lived quietly in the old hunter's hut. She gathered fruit and fetched water from a small stream nearby. He tried to help, but his body was still weak. At night, they sat by the fire. The man often looked into the flames without speaking. He carried pain in his eyes, like he was thinking about everything he had lost. Sia didn't ask questions. She only said they were safe for now. But the forest had its own eyes. Hunters passed sometimes, and one of them noticed smoke rising through the trees. He told the soldiers that someone was living deep inside the forest, someone who looked like a noble. That small piece of news began to travel. Back in the palace, the new king sat in silence as his spy whispered the story. He didn't need proof. He knew his brother was alive. He sent the royal hunter, a tall man named Koro, with 10 soldiers to search the forest. Koro was known for finding anyone who tried to hide. Sia didn't know danger was coming. She spent her mornings cleaning the hut, her evenings collecting food. One afternoon, she found the man outside trying to walk. His legs were shaking, but he refused to rest. He told her that he needed to become strong again. Sia helped him back inside and cooked a meal for them both. That night, the wind blew hard. Leaves flew through the cracks in the walls. Sia couldn't sleep. She had a strange feeling that something was wrong. Before dawn, she went out to fetch water and saw footprints on the edge of the stream. They were fresh. She ran back to the hut. The man was awake, his eyes alert. He picked up a stick and stood by the door. Sia's heart beat fast. The sound of men's voices grew closer. Soon, the forest filled with shouts. Soldiers were spreading out, calling to each other. Sia and the man knew they couldn't fight. They ran. Through the trees, through mud, through rain. The ground was slippery, and her feet were bleeding, but she didn't stop. The soldiers followed their trail until night fell. The two hid inside a cave behind a waterfall. The air was cold and wet. The man leaned against the stone wall, breathing heavily. Sia sat beside him, holding his hand. He looked at her and said softly that he would not run forever. He said he had to face what was coming. The next morning, they left the cave. They found an old road that led out of the forest to a quiet village on the other side. The people there didn't ask questions. They looked poor and tired, like they had seen too much war. Sia and the man stayed in an empty barn. She worked at the market to earn a little food, and he began helping the villagers fix broken things. Slowly, he gained their trust. Months passed. The man grew strong again. He started talking more about his past. He said he missed his father, who had once ruled with fairness. He said his brother had changed after greed entered the palace. He wanted peace, not power. Sia listened quietly. She had never seen the world beyond Ntambe, but she could feel his truth. One day, soldiers arrived in the village. The man and Sia hid behind a wall, holding their breath. But these soldiers were different. They carried no banners. Their clothes were worn, their faces tired. They were rebels, men who had once served the old king. When they saw the man's face, they dropped to their knees. Sia finally learned his name, Prince Otto, the lost heir of Aduna. The rebels told him the people still waited for him. They said the new king had become cruel. Taxes were heavy, farms were burned, and families were forced to leave their homes. The kingdom was dying. Prince Otto didn't speak for a long time. Then he stood up and said he would return, not to take revenge, but to set things right. Sia was afraid. She told him that going back meant death. But he said some things were worth dying for. The rebels began to gather more men. Sia stayed close, helping treat the wounded and feeding the hungry. She didn't understand politics or war, but she knew what pain looked like, and she saw it everywhere. Word spread fast. The new king heard that his brother was alive. and raising an army. His anger turned cold. He sent more soldiers to burn the villages and crush anyone who stood in his way. When the war began, Sia saw what fear truly looked like. Fire filled the night skies. People screamed. The rebels fought hard, but they were outnumbered. Still, Prince Atto never gave up. He moved from village to village, helping the weak, giving them hope. He never forgot Sia. She was always there, quiet but brave. She never asked for gold or thanks. She just stood beside him when others ran. One night the rebels were surrounded. They fought all night, and by morning only a few survived. Sia was among them. Prince Atto was wounded again, but he kept fighting. The forest that once hid them now became their battlefield. When the sun rose, silence covered the land. Smoke rose from the burned trees. The king's army left, thinking everyone was dead, but Sia and Prince Atto still breathed. She helped him up once more, just as she had done the first day by the river. And together, they walked toward the mountains where the kingdom's last loyal people were waiting. Weeks passed in the mountains. The air was thin and cold, but peace lived there for a short time. Sia and Prince Atto stayed among farmers and shepherds who offered them food and shelter. The rebels who had survived gathered again, fewer now but stronger in spirit. Prince Atto began to plan. He knew the kingdom would never heal if his brother stayed on the throne. But he didn't want more bloodshed. He wanted a way to end the war without destroying the people. Sia watched him change. The man she had found half dead by the river was no longer the same. His eyes had grown harder, but his heart stayed kind. Sometimes she would wake in the night and see him sitting alone, staring at the stars. He told her once that he didn't know if he would live to see peace. Life in the mountains wasn't easy. Food was scarce and snow covered the fields. But the people respected Sia. They said she brought light wherever she went. She worked from dawn till dusk, helping anyone who needed her. The villagers began calling her the Quiet Mother, even though she was still young. One day a man arrived from the capital. He said he was a merchant, but his hands were too clean and his eyes too sharp. He came offering supplies and money for the rebels. He said many nobles were secretly tired of the new king's cruelty and wanted to help. Prince Atto accepted his offer, not knowing that this man served the king himself. The merchant left the next morning, but his words carried poison. The king's army followed soon after. That night, while the rebels slept, fire surrounded the mountain camp. Arrows rained from above. Men shouted, running through the flames. Sia woke to the sound of terror. She dragged the wounded away and tried to save who she could. Prince Atto fought like a man with nothing left to lose. His sword was broken, his arm bleeding, but he did not run. The king's men kept coming, wave after wave. When the battle ended, the mountain was silent. The snow was red. Sia found Prince Atto lying near a fallen tree, breathing but weak. She tore a piece of her dress to stop his bleeding. His face was pale, his eyes half open. She refused to leave him. She carried him step by step down the slope until they found an old stone temple hidden in the cliffs. For days she stayed there, feeding him water drop by drop. Slowly, his breath grew steady again. Outside, the king declared victory. He told the people the rebellion was over, that peace had returned. But fear filled every village. Farmers were forced to pay heavy taxes again. Anyone who spoke the prince's name was punished. Months passed in silence. The world thought Prince Atto was dead, but deep in the mountains he lived, kept alive by the woman who had once saved him from the river. When spring came, the snow melted. Sia told him it was time to return. Not with weapons, but with truth. She said people no longer needed another war. They needed someone to remind them of what was right. Prince Atto listened. He sent word to the people he trusted. Slowly they began to gather. Farmers, old soldiers, women, and children. They came not to fight, but to stand together. The news reached the capital. The king laughed at first, but when his spies told him that thousands were walking toward the city carrying no weapons, only banners of peace, his laughter faded. He sent his guards to stop them. But when the guards saw the faces of mothers, children, and old men, they dropped their spears. The people kept walking. When Prince Atto reached the gates of the city, the crowd stretched as far as the eye could see. The king stood on the palace steps watching. For the first time, he felt afraid. He ordered his archers to fire, but no one moved. His own men refused. Then from the crowd, a single figure stepped forward. It was Sia. She walked ahead of everyone, straight toward the king. Her clothes were torn, her hands rough, but her voice was steady. She told him the people were tired of greed, tired of fear, tired of kings who forgot what it meant to serve. The king's hand shook. He shouted for his men to arrest her, but no one obeyed. The people stood still, silent and strong. Prince Otto walked beside her then, and the crowd fell to its knees. The king knew it was over. He turned, trying to flee, but his own guards blocked his path. That day, the palace gates opened for the people of Aduna. The war ended not with blood, but with courage. Sia refused to move into the palace. She stayed in her small home by the river, where everything had begun. Prince Otto became king, ruling not with fear but with memory. He never forgot the maid who saved him, the woman who showed him what real power was. Years later, when peace filled the kingdom again, people still told the story of Sia, the maid who hit a king and changed a nation. They said the river of Ntambe once returned the dead. But that was not true. That river had returned hope.